Session 3, Applying for and Implementing a Global Grant. In this session, we'll review how to write a successful grant application, help to understand grant financing, and finally discuss the importance of evaluation. There are a few basics that every global grant has to meet. First, the minimum size of a global grant is at least $30,000. It must involve at least 2 Rotary clubs from 2 separate countries. Third, it must meet the goals of at least one area of focus. 4, it must be sustainable, meaning the project continues on after the grant activities end. And finally, your club must complete this qualification process. And although this session will focus on applying for global grants, the grant management practice that we discuss could be used for all grant types. These are the 6 areas of focus. Every global grant must address at least one of these areas of focus. Each area of focus has specific goals that should be used to refine projects that are developed to meet real community needs. Sustainability is a critical part of a global grant. To be sustainable, a project or activity will continue to have an impact long after the funds are expended. A project must meet a community need that is consistent with the values and culture of the project's beneficiaries. Equipment and technology for a project should be purchased from local sources whenever possible. Spare parts for equipment should be available within the community. Community members should be involved in selecting the equipment and should be trained to maintain and repair it. And a local funding source should cover long-term operation, maintenance, and repair. Your project should strengthen the beneficiary's knowledge and skills through education and training. Project partners should all collaborate with local organizations to supply expertise and identify individuals willing to assume leadership roles in the community for sustaining project outcomes. Clear and measurable project objectives should be developed and a method for collecting data established. Figures will ideally demonstrate change for at least 3 years. Now that you've found your project and your partners, this is how you get your global grant started in District 6900. Step 1 is to contact the Global Grant Chair, Ann Glenn, to ensure that the district money is available to match your funding. District money for global grants comes from DDF, District Designated Funds. It's a finite pot of money, so you want to make sure that the funds are held for your project. When you talk with Ann, you'll be assigned a grant coach, if you want one, to review your project and work with you before you ever submit it online to the Rotary Foundation. This gives you the opportunity to collect additional information and work the bugs out before it goes up. Once you've completed that, your project should be entered on the grant application tool at Rotary.org. You apply for a global grant at www.rotary.org/grants, an online application system. To start your global grant application, complete First Steps by hitting the Start button. It will give you general information about grant activity and best practices. After navigating through the first steps, you'll be able to start your grant application. Any grant activity, global grant activity your club has will show up on this screen. Open grants that have not yet been approved will show up in the application section. If a grant's been approved and is still open, it'll be in the open grant section. And any grants that have been completed will be in the closed grant section. If you need to take some action on an existing grant that's already open, the Attention Needed section will provide an alert. Before starting your application, the primary project contacts from each of the partner clubs must already be designated, and a grant title must be decided upon. This information is required in order to proceed with the application. Applications must include a detailed project implementation plan and budget. If you have questions about the application, contact the Rotary staff through a messaging function with the grant application system, or contact Ann Glenn or your grant coach. This will help ensure that your application is complete before you submit it. Depending on the project's budget and complexity, there may be multiple steps to the grant review process. Once the grant is approved, the primary contacts from the partner clubs will receive a formal notification. The club president or district Rotary Foundation chair must authorize the legal agreement to implement the grant. All of these are completed online in this application center. Let's talk for a minute about global grant financing. The minimum budget for a global grant is $30,000 in US dollars. The Rotary Foundation rules say that DDF, district designated funds, are matched 100% with the World Fund. They put $1 with every dollar that's sent up as designated as DDF. Money that comes from Rotarians or non-Rotarians, money that comes from your club and goes up for a grant, is only matched 50 cents on the dollar. Thanks to the generosity of Rotarians here in District 6900, we're able to finance global grants a little bit differently. When your club begins a global grant, the very first step is to call Ann Glenn, our District Global Grant Chair, to find out if there's DDF available. Present your project to Ann. Tell her how much the total project is going to be. If the funds are available in the World Fund, and they generally are, then District 6900 will pledge a contribution from DDF equal to 100% of the club funds raised for a global grant project where a District 6900 club is either the host or the international partner. That means that grant has to be initiated here in this district, or we are the recipients of that grant. A club here in our district is a recipient. Now, when you get down to filling out the application on the grant application tool at Rotary.org, on the funding section, all of the pledged funds, the money from the club and DDF, when that gets entered, we show it as DDF only, because DDF is matched 100% by the Foundation's World Fund. That means 1-to-1. Of course, we don't send the money up when you fill out the application. We wait, because some applications, not many if you're working with a coach, but some applications are not approved by the Rotary Foundation. So after the application is complete and has been approved by the Rotary Foundation, then the Global Grants Chair, Ann Glenn, will contact your club, and at that point you will be asked to send your club contribution to the annual fund as a regular contribution, just like you send up all of your Paul Harris Fellow money. Make a copy of the check and send that to the grant chair, Ann Glenn, as confirmation that you've completed your part of the funding. At that point, Ann Glenn and Margie Kersey, on behalf of District 6900, will then send all of the pledged funds as DDF up to the grant. The most important thing to remember, projects that are initiated outside our district do not get a district match. They follow the standard method. The Rotarians in this district have been generous. We use that money to match grants initiated by clubs in this district. There are some other guidelines you need to know about financing your grant. First, the international sponsor is going to be asked to provide at least 30% of the total sponsor funding. Rotarians cannot collect funds from beneficiaries or cooperating organizations in exchange for receiving the grant. Contributions can't come from another Rotary grant. And of course, cash contributions should always be credited to the individuals who gave the funds. Rotarians cannot collect funds from individuals and claim the donation as their own unless they've received explicit information from the donors to do so. There's a few other things you might like to remember about financing. First, up to 10% of your total grant funds may be designated for contingencies. Up to 3% may be designated for administrative fees, and up to 5% may be designated for monitoring and evaluation. But most importantly, remember, 5% of all cash donations are deducted for Rotary processing and operating fees, so plan for 5% more than what you think you're going to need. We've mentioned DDF several times during this seminar. DDF stands for District Designated Funds. The amount of DDF available in the district each year is determined by the generosity of Rotarians 3 years earlier. You're giving to the annual fund. Up to 50% of the DDF received each year can be used for district grants. The remaining DDF is used as district matching funds for global grants. Conflict of interest can make or break your global grant. A conflict of interest exists when a Rotarian may benefit financially or personally from grant activities. The benefit could either be direct, in that the Rotarian receives the funds or their business does, or indirect. Maybe the funds are going to an associate of the Rotarian. Financial benefits could be receiving grant funds for being a project manager or receiving grant funds as a vendor for the project. Personal benefits could be receiving a promotion, getting business referrals, gaining publicity, or improved social standing. Associates could include family members, friends, other Rotarians, personal acquaintances, colleagues, or even business partners. Rotarians have a reputation for personal integrity. Addressing and preventing conflict of interest helps preserve this reputation for the club, the district, and the Rotary Foundation. When Rotarians freely disclose any direct or indirect association with the grant project, they help ensure fair process and transparency in the use of foundation funds. Rotarians must disclose any conflicts of interest on the grant application. If Rotarians aren't sure whether a particular situation is a conflict of interest, you should talk with your grant officer, talk with Ann Glenn, talk with Margie Kersey, talk with the Rotary Foundation. Work it out. An actual or perceived conflict of interest does not necessarily disqualify a Rotarian from participation in a grant. Eligibility for participation will be determined on a case-by-case situation upon disclosure of the conflict of interest. Now we're getting down to the fun part, implementation of your project. There are a few things that are crucial to successful implementation. The first is communication. You should communicate regularly with partners and community members about the progress of the grant. Talk with the scholars regularly about the progress of their studies. Both partner clubs and both districts to report on how the funds are being spent. And of course, communicate to the Rotary Foundation according to the reporting requirements of the grant terms and conditions. The club must implement a financial management plan for grant funds, including a separate bank account, a plan to transfer the custody of the account if necessary, a plan to disperse funds, and any requirements related to local laws. Record keeping. Detailed grant records simplify reporting on the use of grant funds, responding to inquiries, and increasing the transparency of how the grant funds were managed. And for global grants, follow the Rotary approved grant fund. Any changes to the scope or budget of your project requires the Rotary Foundation's approval before you implement it. Conducting an evaluation helps your club determine the success of a project and identify any areas of improvement for the future. An evaluation will assist the club with your reporting requirements. Use the lessons learned to replicate success and adjust for challenges in the next project. Review the goals. Use the goals set during the planning stage to evaluate the success of your project. The data and evaluation method and frequency should be set during the planning stage, and the project evaluation happens during implementation through completion and beyond. Promoting project and activity successes both within your club and with the public gets others involved and interested in participating in Rotary, and it's a great way to let donors know how their funds were spent. This is the end of part 3, applying for a grant and implementing your project. As you've seen, the steps are simple but crucial to success. If you didn't get all the details on these, back up and look at this section again. The information contained in this module will be critical to the success of your project. Only one more part to go.